say the mound builders died out. I don't think mound builders died out. That's us out there today. We're there today. That's like saying the pyramid builders of Egypt died out. They didn't die out. They're still over there today. You know, they just don't build pyramids anymore. Why'd they stop building pyramids? You know, find that out, then we'll stop. Find out why we quit building mounds. They built pyramids in South America. The thing about the mounds is they stopped the Mississippi River. Because they call it the Mississippian mound builders is what we call it, or what they're called. They don't go east or west of the Mississippi. The biggest town is right there in someplace on the Mississippi. Biggest mound building town. And it was humongous in size. You know, that goes back so many thousands of years. And there again, you got these people living on the water because you got to have fresh water. You can't have stale water. You can't drink swamp water because Ohio was a lot of swamp. You can't drink that water, so you have to live close to a fresh water source. But you have to keep it out of your garden. You have to keep it out of your house. So that's my theory on the mound builders.
So, you know, language is important, but there's also an awful lot of symbolism. The symbolism, which is what we refer to when we look at the earthworks, those symbolisms, you know, and it's like even, you know, when people look at these mounds, and they say, oh, those are burial sites, those are ceremonial sites. And I said, no, those are monuments to the importance of women. I said, those symbolize the belly of a pregnant woman. So when the Indian people built those mounds, they built those to commemorate, to always understand and to always remember the importance of women in our society, in our culture, in our world, in who we are as a nation. To remind us of the importance of women. And the people that were put into those, buried in those mounds, they were put back into the womb so that their spirit can be reborn on this earth. So those aren't burial mounds. That's our connection to our mother, Inimaka. That's part of our culture. So when it gets defined as just a burial mound, that is a part of the cultural and spiritual genocidal process that we see today, that exists in our society today. Even terminology is a part of a cultural genocidal process.
And one of the things that my grandfather believes in strongly is that the Dakota people originated here in the Ohio area, and particularly here in Licking County. And some of the stories, if we don't run out of film by the time we actually get to them, that I'm going to be sharing with you are not my stories. And I'll tell you that they were passed down to me by my grandpa. And what's really amazing is that they were passed down to me by both of my grandpas of two different heritage. One being the Dakota over in South Dakota, and the other one being Mohawk from the New York, Canada area. And the stories that I learned from both of my grandfathers about these sacred areas in this area are almost identical. Just totally blows me away. And but the Dakota people, my grandpa would tell you that the Great Circle Mound over there, he's in Newark. If you look at the shape of it, the shape of our modern day Sundance Circle, they would be one and the same. Now we don't use mounds nowadays, but it's still a great circle with the opening to the east. And if you look at the great circle, it's a great circle with an opening to the east. And in 1992, the archaeologists and archaeological students wanted to do a dig into the mound, and this upset my grandfather a great deal. And Grandpa, being a stroke victim, he actually had to use my shoulder, and I'd kind of pull him along to go wherever he wanted to go. And we got down there, and Brad Lepper kind of confronted us, and said that we weren't going to be allowed in. And I'm fairly certain that Grandpa kind of pushed me forward, and we kind of went in anyway. And we stayed and we talked, and Grandpa told them that we shouldn't do this. And he's trying to explain to them that to this day that is still a sacred site. Grandpa believing that that's where our sun dance was first held, and that was the purpose of that, and also to mark the sun. My grandpa also pointed out that our people, when we would come down, we'd cross the lake of the Great Panther. It is Erie. Erie is the most smallest of the Great Lakes, the most shallowest of the Great Lakes. But it has some terrific storms on it, including to this day waterspout. And boy, it acts like a panther. The lake of the panther. Is that alligator over there in Granville, or is it a water panther? And another story that I heard that I read about in James Kingley's book, and I heard the same story from my Dakota grandpa, and I heard the same story from my Mohawk grandpa, and I believe it. That people of many different nations could come to Flint Ridge, could come to Black Can Gorge, could come to the Circle Mounds, and come to the Arctic Mounds, and they would, even if the nations were warring against one another, they would treat each other as a friend at these sacred sites. That's Wakan. That's sacred. So we went over to the Great Circle Mound, and sure enough, there was Brad Lepper. And Brad, if you're watching this, realize that I know that you're a good guy. We're just talking about 1992, okay? Give it a break. There was Brad and the students, and they had a great big crowd. And Brad said something to the effect that the Indians were not going to be allowed to set up their teepees, and they weren't even going to be allowed on the ground. Me being me, that's all it took. And by golly, we were in the grounds. Now, I'll tell you something that it's funny. We never actually did stop them from digging. But we took the opportunity to explain our point of view. And 4 times each day, 13 times a day, we had ceremony. Now, I led those ceremonies. Again, I'll remind you, I am not a spiritual leader. But Grandpa told me to do this, so I did that. And what was really funny is every time the students would go over to do their dig, it would pour down rain. And every time we would stop to do a ceremony, the weather was beautiful. And each night, the crowds just got larger and larger and larger. And so the other day when I was on the radio with Brad, and you know, in the past 15 years or so, I'm doing things that if he had asked me earlier would ever happen, I would tell you it was impossible. But our people are working with archaeologists. Our people are working with historians. We're working with anthropologists to a certain extent. There's still quite a few things that organizations like the Ohio Historical Society does that is wrong, will never be right, and we will always disagree on that. But I also believe that if we start finding some common ground now, then maybe someday we can talk about more serious issues and come to a better agreement. Maybe they'll have a better understanding.
And going back to traditional ways, we have to be able to pray. And there's more to traditional praying than some people think. And we have sacred spaces. And Earthworks in the Mounds is one of them sacred spaces. There's a feeling that you get. Many Native people suffer from what we call historic PTSD, where you can be somewhere and you can hear the voices of the ancestors. And you know that this is a place where you need to be. And unfortunately, with the golf course on there, I get real upset because my right to pray is invaded by a culture who is hitting a little ball into a hole while they are drinking alcohol and rubbing it into my ancestor's face. That bothers me. That bothers me. It bothers me that we have to have validation. Let us dig up the mound, and if we find remains, then we can say it's a burial mound. Well, let me dig up the cemetery, and if I find remains, I will tell you. You know, or they will tell us, okay, we found remains, and you can have the remains of your people back. That's really nice and big of you. But, you know, we got these nice pots, and they're worth more on the market, and we need to put these in a glass case in a museum. Well, let me dig up your grandmother. I want her gold teeth in her wedding ring. You can have the body back, but I need to take those things. That's how it feels. And we just can't get this across to people. You know, there is no cultural respect, you know, in this area. And you need to respect other people's culture. And I'm not just talking about Native people.
Those are some of those things that happen. But, you know, getting back to Ohio, about why some of the things that go on, and why did I do some of the things that are here, is because there's a lot to be learned. There's a lot to be learned, and there is a window that is coming. And that window is coming because of the alignments. You know, there's going to be alignment this coming year in October, and that's going to be, you know, the moon, the lunar alignment, and it's going to align with the Octagon Mountain. And I mean, you know, they've talked about it, and that's a good program. And I really encourage people to go out there because, you know, so that they can understand those alignments. And I really wish that, you know, as Indian people, that they would, you know, take a look at what is still here and what has been destroyed, because those alignments are very important to, you know, to the cycle of life.
But in all my stories, no lunar alignment. And yet, I heard about the octagon mound and how it lines up with the moon, and it makes perfect sense to me. And I pointed out on the radio about to this day our traditional calendar is based on the moon. And so is quite a few other cultures around the world to this day. That's the reason. Brad thinks that there's 30 feet of the octagon mound that doesn't fit into alignment. And he seems to think that when the militia reconstructed some of the mounds, the Ohio militia, and despite what the golf course people will tell you, a lot of those mounds, yes, were reconstructed. A lot of those mounds are still the real McCoy. They never were destroyed. So don't let those fool you. But some of the mounds that were reconstructed, they're engineers. So, for it to make literal sense, you need another 30 feet. And so they built the other 30 feet. But Brad believes that that 30 feet should not have been there. And I agree with him. And his thinking was because it doesn't line up with the lunar alignment at 30 feet. And my thinking is that when you look at Native American objects, be it handmade or what it is, you will always see an imperfection. And Dr. Horn Hively goes, really? And I said, yeah. And why is that? Well, the only thing that's perfect is God. And our people to show that, they always put in imperfection. And Dr. Hively said, well, we have some Navajo rugs, and that imperfection, that's the way they explained it to us. So it makes perfect sense. I said, well, in that 30 feet, take it off. Not only does it still line up correctly with the lunar, but it also shows an imperfection. And I said, another thing you might want to consider about the actual design about the octagon mound is if you look at God's creation, and you can pick out anything, even these trees, even though they're straight up and down, if you look at them closely, there's a lot of circles in them. And you're going to see these circles in everything that God created, even human beings. And so you might think of the circles representing the people. And you might look at that octagon, and the octagon, you're not going to see that in the creation. So perhaps that represents the supernatural. And if you look at the octagon mound closely, there's kind of a roadway, a path between the circle, the people, and the supernatural. So there's that connection. So I'm intrigued about the moonrise, and after we ate lunch, Brad says, the stories that you shared with us were fascinating, and they make a lot of sense. And so I think there's a lot of hope for us to learn from one another. And I'm looking forward to it, because one of the things that Dr. Lepper is doing, that Grandpa always talked about, is that there should be some kind of a connection between the mounds in the Newark, Ohio area and the mounds that are down in the Chillicothe area. And he said there should be a holy road that connects those two. And one of the things that Dr. Lepper has discovered over the several years, remnants of a holy road that connects Newark and Chillicothe. So I'm looking forward to learning more about that, especially since they won't be intrusive in the land. They won't be digging into the land. This is all going to be on the surface. Native Americans in the Ohio area. Perhaps through God's guidance, we was able to hold on to the mounds because of the golf course. And if you think about it, there's no logical reason for any of these mounds to still be in existence. It'd be more logical for people because, as people have pointed out about the Octagon Mound, for example, from the ground you can't actually realize what you're looking at. It doesn't look like an octagon and circle mound. It just looks like a bunch of mounds. And it would have made more sense, to plow them under, and nowadays put housing divisions in there and farming's in there. But my contention is that there are certain sacred areas that always will be sacred areas. And Wakantanka, our name for God, which means great mystery, is indeed a great mystery and sometimes works in very mysterious ways. And so maybe one of the ways that they maintain the mounds for the coming generations is with the golf course. And so perhaps we ought to take the opportunity here, and with the people of the Friends of the Mounds, the Native American communities, the archaeologists, people of the Ohio Historical Society, and people of the Mound Builders Golf Course, maybe we ought to start a fundraising, because the ceremonies that we had at the Circle Mound in 1992, the evening ceremonies, every evening, a couple of thousands of people showing up, people of many races, many walks of life, coming together, unified. I believe that exists here. Maybe it's time to move that golf course.